introduce you from there and bring you up. So if you'd sit down on the ground level over here. Seriously, over here. And
over here. Okay, fine. Okay.
Joe will introduce you.
That's fine.
When he introduces you, you come up to the podium, say for your opening remarks, and then once you're done with your opening remarks, you go ahead and take a seat center stage, and that's when you start.
I'll take a seat. I won't do it from the podium. That's fine. That's cool.
Mic on here. Can you hear me okay? How's that? A little better? All right. Okay. Well, first of all, welcome to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. How many of you have ever been here before? Anybody? Good, good. All right. Hopefully you haven't been here recently because it's very, very different. We went through a major renovation and expansion here recently, so hopefully this is even new for you. But for those of you who have never been here before, please enjoy the day. We hope you do. We think it'll be a very interesting experience for you as you go through the building, particularly after you hear from our guest speaker today. And I want to tell you a little bit about, obviously, why we're here. This is in celebration of Black History Month. And during this period of time, we at the Pro Football Hall of Fame like to use the opportunity to not only share some history relevant to the study and the story of African Americans in pro football, but what we as a country, as a sport, as a human being, learn from that experience. We learn about persevering. We learn about overcoming obstacles. We learn about determination. All of these things that we can use in our everyday life. So this is not just about the experience of some people, but it's about the experience, the life experience of all people. How we should behave, how we should think forward, and how we should learn from the past. So hopefully today, all of these things that we're talking about right now will have an impact on you going forward. And some of the things you hear from our guest today, who I'll be introducing here in a second, I think will resonate with you as you go through life and you think about, how do I do this? How do I keep going? What's my motivation? What's my reward? What's my challenges? How do I overcome the obstacles in front of me? And now I'm going to wait just 1 second because we got some students coming in. We want to make sure they get seats here, and then we'll get right into everything. Thank you all for getting through the Ohio weather this morning. This has been a challenge for schools all year long so far. 1 second here. We have a few seats up here on the, over here, right about 4 rows back. And I think they'll probably have to pull a few more out. Here come some chairs. Really, what do you think? You got a full house here today.
It's very impressive.
Okay, all right, I'm going to go right back into what we were talking about here. While we're getting some chairs set up in the back, let's go around and let's introduce you to Willie. We're going to have each of you schools kind of give yourselves a little bit of a welcome by letting us know you're here with a nice round of applause for yourself. First, do I have anybody here from Canton South? Come on, Canton South, let's hear it loud. All right, Woodridge High School, you can do better than that, right? Yeah. Services. School. Here yet. Okay. Glen Oak High School. I think some of those guys got big hands. Melbourne High School. Open Door Christian Schools. Streetsboro High School. I'm going to step back from that one. Ooh. Copley High School. All right, there we go. All right, Altitude Academy. Difficult for me. This one I have, I'm going to read this one, make sure it's correct. C2RA Academy. Oh! There we go, back on. East Local from East Canton? Yeah. Yeah, go, all right. And we have a couple of schools joining us by video conferencing. So back in Flushing, New York, Veritas Academy, give yourself a hand.
They must not have heard you, Joe.
Creek Elementary from Humboldt, Texas, hooking up video conference-wise. And I'm not seeing a reaction, so I'm wondering if they hear us. All right, we're going to keep going. My mic is fading in and out here, Jerry. I'm losing this mic. It's on now. Please. All right, we're going to go to the podium one now. All right, very good. I think we got that resolved. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, I want to take some time right now to introduce you to our special guest. As I mentioned already, his name as I was talking directly to him, but Mr. Willie Lanier is a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He was elected as one of the greatest players to ever play. I'll emphasize that, one of the greatest players ever to play. He was elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which is the highest honor a pro football player could ever achieve. He did that in 1986. That means he is one of just 287 people who have been elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. There's been over 24,000 men who've played the game. And there's actually fewer than 260 players in the Hall of Fame, because there's coaches and contributors too. So think about that, under 260 players out of 24,000 since the game began, since the NFL began in 1920. Only that few have been elected to the Hall of Fame. So that gives you an idea of what he's achieved already for his playing career. But we're going to talk more about that. Willie played with the Kansas City Chiefs. He was a second-round draft pick back in 1967. He had an 11-season career there, played in the Super Bowl. What we know about Super Bowl IV is that for those of you who understand the Super Bowl now, it's the AFC versus the NFC, okay, for the championship. Well, back when Willie played, it was two different leagues. The AFC was called the AFL, the American Football League, and the National Football League. And in Super Bowl IV, they were a big underdog, not to win. Underdog means not winning. And they turned that around and they made a statement. Their league, the American Football League, achieved parity with the National Football League in that game. It was an extremely important game at that time because there was a merger happening that next year with the two leagues. So it was very important that the American Football League asserted itself and said, we're as good as the National Football League. And that's what they did back in Super Bowl IV. Willie was beyond just being a player. He was the NFL Man of the Year in 1972. And that goes a lot to character. And I've known Willie for many, many years, and I can tell you, he has a lot of character. And that's very, very important in success, not only on the football field, but in life after football. He was selected to play in 8 Pro Bowls, which back then the Pro Bowl really meant something. It wasn't flipping a coin and having Team Dion and Team Jerry Rice. It was selected by the players, by your peers. So to make a Pro Bowl was really an accomplishment. So to do it 8 times during his 11-year career was outstanding. He was elected not only to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but he's in the Kansas City Chiefs Hall of Fame, the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame. And in 1986, as I say, he was elected to our Hall of Fame here. And that was the year, and when he was elected was the year that we were celebrating our 75th anniversary in the National Football League, celebrating the best of the best in the National Football League, and Mr. Lanier was named to the NFL's all-time 75th anniversary team. Beyond his football career, Mr. Lanier went into investment banking for Wachovia Securities, now known as formerly known as Wheat First Securities, as a financial consultant. Now, I only bring that up only to let you know that there is life after football. And in Willie Lanier's life after football, he took what he took out of his education and used that. But he also used the skills that he learned on the sports competitive field, in the football field. He learned about competition. He learned about working hard to achieve what you achieve. There were always obstacles in everybody's life. But certainly in Willie's life, there was something different. In the 1960s, when he was in college and then when he came into the pros, the world was a very different place. The United States was a very different place. In the 1960s, you would find that you couldn't have what we have right here today. Black and white students together in the same room at the same program. Schools were segregated. Hotels, when teams went on the road, players couldn't stay in the same hotels. Some cities, in 1960, for instance, they had to integrate Dallas Stadium to get a franchise in the National Football League. That's amazing. When you think about Dallas, probably 75, 80% of the players are now African American. The stadium couldn't be integrated back when the team was applying for a franchise in the National Football League. So we have had a lot of change in our lives. But Mr. Lanier is here today to talk to you not only about the change in the atmosphere of the country at the time compared to today, but to tell you what he learned, how he learned to accept change, to work for change, and how he benefited from the adversities put in front of him and how he met the challenges. Now, this time I want to ask if we could just we have a quick video clip to kind of put his pro football playing career in perspective, and then I'm going to formally introduce you to our guest speaker here.
Middle linebacker Willie Lanier was a dominant force on a Kansas City defense that dominated the league.
Good shape, baby!
Nicknamed Contact, Lanier punished his opponents with precise, earth-shattering hits. His uncompromising play catapulted him into 2 AFL All-Star games and 6 Pro Bowls.
You didn't get that. Oh, I heard that. A groan, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask our guest speaker, Willie Lanier, to come up and say a few words before we turn the program into discussion with you. So please welcome Hall of Famer Willie Lanier.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the introduction. It's always interesting for me to have that introduction because all of those things athletically obviously happened many years ago. It's a great part of my history. Sometimes it almost feels a little embarrassing to have such great recognition. I enjoy all of it. The essence of it has been a great part of my journey. But as we recognize Black History Month, as I go through speaking to you today about my views on many things that has occurred over the last, for me, 6 to 8 years, then it becomes one of trying to frame for you as you go forward, as if though you were my children. And I have 3, 2 sons and a daughter. And I would hope that you take something from your moment here to appreciate some of the things that you hear, to let it be a guide to where you might be in the next 20 or 30 years. The reality of being at a Pro Football Hall of Fame is a special moment and a special time. But it all comes with something that's done before you even get close to being here. So I asked Joe Horrigan to go get me the USA Today, which I read this morning. And I asked him to do that for a reason. So I would ask all of you, how many of you here today, raise your hands, have read a newspaper this morning? The point I want to make is this about reading a newspaper or some number of newspapers every day, because all of us start somewhere. All of us develop a mindset that might make us somewhat different. At 12 years of age in Richmond, Virginia, I started carrying newspapers. And not only did I start carrying newspapers, I started to understand responsibility when that customer reaches out of their home on a day like today, on a day that's raining, on a day that's storming, And when they open the door and reach, they expect to see their paper, regardless of what the conditions are. So I end up understanding a responsibility starting at 12 years of age about doing something from a business standpoint. So not only did I do that, but I started reading the newspapers. Well, the thing that I found about doing that was that what it would do was start to give me a greater understanding of everything that was going on in real time. Not only that which was being taught in the schools, but the ability to use your own mind to make decisions, being relevant about things that are going on in the world, making yourself much more broad, because as you sit here today in Canton, Ohio at this Hall of Fame, you are going to be competing with people from around the world that you can't see, and not on the athletic standpoint, on the academic standpoint. So if they're getting up in the morning doing things that you are not doing, and you think about 5, 10 years from now, when you're competing with someone else in the world for skill, for jobs, for employment, then you have a different reality to deal with. So at 12 years of age, starting to carry newspapers, it was really interesting that there were things that I didn't know expanded about America. I lived in a segregated environment in Richmond, Virginia. All the coaches in the schools, everything was segregated. The college I attended was segregated. So there was not the openness that you have as you sit here. So at 14 in 1959, the Richmond Times-Dispatch had a contest. And that contest was that if you were able to get more subscribers than your other individuals, there was a trip you could win to Miami, Florida. A 1-week trip to Miami, Florida. My family had never been any further from Richmond than our grandparents 100 miles away, or maybe up to Washington, D.C. to visit another relative. So being competitive, this is where it starts. Anytime there was a contest, I just wanted to know the rules, and I would try to figure out how to win it. So I was able to win a trip in May 1959 from Richmond, Virginia to Miami, Florida, because I carried newspapers. But the interesting thing about it was that the contest was for all the newspaper carriers. Even though the substations were segregated, it was from those throughout the city. So we were able to meet at the Union Station in Richmond, Virginia in May 1959, heading to Miami Beach, Florida. Similarly, it would be all carriers, and this could be the group, black and white, male, female, that headed to Florida on a train from Richmond. Once we arrived in Miami, Florida at the train station, there were 2 sets of buses, similar to the buses you took here this morning. But the buses were segregated. All whites were on one bus, all blacks or African Americans was on another. Those who were on the white buses were taken to the Fontainebleau Hotel, Miami Beach, Florida. Those who were on the black bus was taken to the Sir John Hotel, Miami, Florida, Liberty City. So then I get the first reality of, this is interesting. There's some line that extends even further than just the neighborhood where I'm growing up and the city that I'm seeing. Commerce, challenge, change, competition, I reached that. But when the outcome was trying to be defined, it was something different. So all of that started to have a way of setting in my mind that my reading these papers, having a chance to inspire my own self, having a knowledge of all things that could be advanced to me was going to make a difference in my journey. The reality in terms of Brown versus Board of Education, I'm 6 states, so I lived that. I also lived in the South, Richmond, Virginia, where the General Assembly decided that even though the federal government said that it was unconstitutional to have separate but unequal schools, the state of Virginia decided to do something called massive resistance, which illegally they said they would fight it, that states' rights, that word, states' rights, would trump federal law. So there were school systems, similar to all of you all being together in schools here today, that were closed in Virginia and some other cities around the country. They were shut down. But then what happened was that the money was made available for what was called white academies. There were black kids in Prince Edward County, Virginia, that had no schools to attend from 1959 to 1964. I'd already gone off to college. So my journey has been one of observing everything that has gone on, trying to be a part of how to make sense out of it, recognizing that education had to be my way out if that were the case. So I ended up having an opportunity to go to Morgan State College, Baltimore, Maryland, 1963. And 1963 was a very interesting year in this country because that was the year that Martin Luther King gave his speech in Washington, D.C. That was the same weekend that I was heading to college, starting my academic career, but also starting on a journey that the requirement to get to college, trying to figure out what is best for you. So there were no majority schools in the South that were trying to recruit black high school students, academic or athletic to a certain extent. So I had an opportunity to talk with Virginia State University, which was 20 miles from Richmond. They offered me a full scholarship. But in that summer, trying to make my own decisions, I decided that a degree from Virginia State, 4 years hence in business administration, would not give me the better opportunity because everything was so segregated in that part of Virginia. So I called the coach at Morgan State College, Earl Banks, in July of 1963. I hadn't talked to my parents about it, and I said to him that I want to go to your school. He said, son, I don't know anything about you. I said, okay, what do you need to know? He said, I need to have a transcript, I need to see some film. I said, fine, I'll send that. So I had that sent to him. He's now intrigued because this confident young man has called him in July when he thought he already had his roster set. And I caught a Greyhound bus to Baltimore, Maryland. Well, I'm 6'1.5" I'll do it like that. Johnny Manziel, all that. So I'm 6 foot, barely half inch, quarter inch above. And I'm very confident about who I am. So as I arrive in Baltimore, I have to take a entrance exam, which I did in school in the top 10% of incoming freshman class. And he then says to me, all of that's good, but I don't have any money. His scholarships had already been given out. And I said, I didn't come asking for money. I came because I said I wanted to attend your school. So my family and I will do what's required for me to be here the first semester. You'll be so impressed with the academic and athletic work, you will do what you need to do the rest of the way. So that's how I went to college. But then getting there, it put me on a path to Canton because I was a business major and I was a serious business major. I'm a very serious person. I don't tend to have much room for play. The journey of your life is too important for that. Each day and each minute of your time has to have a reference that you must account for. And the only person who can account for it is you. At any point in time, regardless of what the issue is in front of you, you will have to reflect on the time spent that was not spent well, and then who is responsible for that. So therefore, you should not have a lot of room for something called fun, because the journey of life has its place, but the seriousness of it also has its place. There are things that you can achieve in your life that you have no concept happens to exist. Morgan State, there was no way I could have thought about something called Canton, Ohio. Someone called a middle linebacker who looked like me didn't play in the National Football League prior to 1967 full-time. So the opportunities that might be in certain places was not even one that existed in athletics, where athletics at times tended to lead the country. It's televised. It's televised and it's transparent. And because it's televised and it's transparent, people have to see how you perform against others at all times equally. So the subjective realities that could occur where someone is from a better family, someone likes someone better than another, someone sort of feels better, whatever, and you might feel that you didn't get the proper opportunity, tends to be less in sport because of the televising of it. And you can see it nationally as it goes on at all times. So that becomes the part of moving toward, again, my standing here. So being the serious business student, in 1966, as Joe mentioned, the National Football League and the American Football League, the Kansas City Chiefs played the Minnesota Vikings. 4 years before, I'm a senior at Morgan State College. There's a merger that's about to occur between the NFL and the AFL. It's going to affect me because I will not have two entities reaching for my services. I'll only have one. So at that time, I'm following the merger legislation that's going on over in Washington, D.C. There was a congressman named Emanuel Sella, a Democrat out of New York, who was trying to fight the merger because he felt that it would be anti-competitive. These things go on now in Washington as you follow it and as you should. So with that being the case, I ended up doing a senior class paper on the monopolistic aspects of pro football. And I truly understood the model. I understood what they were trying to do. I was hopeful that it didn't pass, at least that year, so I could have been paid better. So my reference to you is that before the person you see on the screen, the person who's hitting people, making plays, I'm doing all of that in my own preparation, understanding of what life is, what business is, what you're trying to achieve for an outcome, and never with a view that I was ever someone called a football player. I run from that like you can't believe. You will never be allowed to define me as that, because there's no degree in college for football. There's no degree for athlete. I was never that. I did it. But the rest of the story was very different. So with that being the reality, with that being the base, coming to the Kansas City Chiefs as the first African-American middle linebacker in pro football history, I also understood something about reality. I can't define any of you and what your hearts feel about anyone else who's sitting near you, across from you today. You live in a free society, which is a joy, but it is a tremendous responsibility living in a free society, because you have the ability to be whoever you choose to be. And I just looked to my left at a young man who needs to do something, so I don't say what he needs to do. Think about it. I'm looking at you, so think about it and do it before I say what you need to do. Okay, so with that being the case, and I smile when I say that, and Joe knew what it was and he couldn't see it, because he remembers a number of years ago how I tended to have made a point about something that was important. He grasped it. So the reality is that, oh, and I might help you to get hired somewhere because you understood it. Okay, so what happens is that all of us are assets to someone else. All of us are always on a job interview every day. Every moment of every day, wherever you are, you're on a job interview, because someone is watching, someone is seeing, someone is defining you by your presence, by how you present yourself, the confidence you show, the work that you do and how you do it. It happens every day, every second of every day once you leave home. So the reality from that standpoint is that the moment I cross the doorstep, I'm on. It's business that day. And that day is lost if you don't use it. So that can never change. But what happens in Kansas City was one that, being this person, African-American, playing a position, I wasn't the first good player at that position, but race didn't allow teams to do what they could have done. So I thought, what can I do that would show me to be more than you as a competitor? If you're the other players, I'm the black guy, you're the white guys, we're looking at performance, what is it I can do that would be different? So what I decided was that if I never had penalties and others had penalties, and that's almost like being in a classroom, and if you never have to have the teacher constantly correcting you, then that might cause you to be viewed as being a better student, a better player, a better person to have on the employ. So I decided that what I would do is to not have any penalties that I could control, and I say it like that, in the time that I played. So I played 11 years and only had 5 penalties. And if you played on my team next to me on the defense, if you had penalties, I'm gonna ask the coach to get rid of you, because I can't allow that. Because the outcome that the Kansas City Chiefs had once in their history, 44 years ago, and they won a Super Bowl, was because we did not do that. Now, it might not be important, but if it is important, things you're trying to achieve, jobs that you have, businesses that you run, places that you work, it is important. I'll get to a business that I was in a little bit later to make a point about what that is. So the reference points of being in a place and time, trying to understand what is it that caused that person to be different? What is it that caused the 280 that are already in? Joe mentioned 287, but they haven't gotten their induction yet. I'll just throw that out. So with that being the case, I'm number 131 that was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And being number 131 was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1986 and played in all those Pro Bowls that was talked about and has an understanding of many things that obviously transcend sport. One of the reasons the Kansas City Chiefs won in 1970 was that in 1967, Willie Lanier, who was a graduate of Morgan State College, started an MBA program at the University of Missouri in Kansas City. I'm trying to stay on track with my college degree. Jim Lynch from Notre Dame started a law program at the University of Missouri in Kansas City because he was trying to further what his educational goals were. We had studious individuals. We had men who graduated from college in many different disciplines. We were not defined from a football standpoint. It was the extracurricular thing that you did while you were in school. But the core of you was something else. So the core of you being something else meant you made better decisions, meant you made it clear that you were more mature, made it clear that you were more goal-oriented. There were a lot of things that had to come together to have the outcomes of a future that can be beneficial to you. So I didn't complete my MBA at that time because I had a head injury that occurred, a concussion and all those things you hear about, and I'm on the safety committee, and I'll get back to that also a little bit later. But it became one of building a base of activity from a business standpoint. I became licensed in securities with Payne Webber Jackson Curtis while I was still playing. I became licensed in real estate as a broker in Missouri and Kansas at 23, 24. I had an opportunity to own a small part of a beer distributorship, which I did while I was still playing. I was trying to continue to advance my academic side. The game was not fulfilling because it's a game. I didn't understand how the best players in the world, when you're in high school and college and you could play well, would come to the pros and all your time was being taken doing something athletic. That was a little bit challenging for me. I understand the dollars are there, but the game, for some of us, once it's understood, has difficulty holding you mentally because you understand it, it's a rote, repetitive activity, and you try to manage how you deal with it from a value standpoint. But the essence of what you do each day to prepare for the future, to be inquisitive, and being inquisitive is something that you should have a thirst that lasts you your entire life. You should constantly want to avail yourself of knowledge wherever you can gain it. You should constantly want to attempt that next thing, wherever that might be. You should constantly want to talk to people and try to connect the dots and understand what is it about them that lets them be who they are, and how might I gain something from that to see what else I might be able to achieve. And it's really a never-ending process. Being in sport, being in business, having a chance to be many places, you find yourself able to utilize all of these skills for what they are, and they can be tremendous. Being in Kansas City with all of the success that we had still meant that the future was something that you were going to constantly try to unfold. So I had another opportunity to go to work with Philip Morris, and I was going to leave the game in 1974 and start as the general manager of Power Tobacco Plant Operations, Philip Morris USA, which dealt with satellite manufacturing facilities in Washington, D.C., and a very business-related activity. Because of the Nixon administration's stimulus program, 74, didn't move forward as had been expected. I played a couple more years in Kansas City. But in the midst of that, one thing that occurred was that I was able to reach again for the educational component. So now at this point in time, at the University of Virginia, the Darden School of Business is one of the preeminent business schools in this country. I was the first African American to attend the executive program at that school in 1975. And attending that program in 1975 at 29 years of age allowed me to compete with people from all across the world. And it had a value in 1975 because I'm the chairman of the board of Morgan State's foundation. And 2 years ago, I was asked to speak at their honors convocation at Morgan. The best professor that I felt offered himself to us in 1975 was a Dr. Alex Horniman, who taught ethics and behavioral science. I called Dr. Horniman prior to my speaking at Morgan to revisit the discussion of ethics, because I think that from a business standpoint, if there were an opportunity for me in the future to have an ethics institute at a couple of the schools where I have interest, I think that would be very important, because the thing that will keep all of you out of trouble over your life is thinking about that word often. That word is called ethics, and making sure you're on the correct side of that line. Obviously, religion and whatever you choose to believe is your own interest, and that can offer you your own view and desire for a future. I offer the ethics line because it's a real one. We have a sport and we have a business. You see what happened in 2008 and 2009 in this country from a business standpoint, because obviously many of the financial leaders didn't understand that line, or chose not to understand it, or allowed themselves to have a lawyer convince them to lean over it. So in the process, we had all of this damage to an economy, all the damage to people's futures, all the damage to a belief in a system that is supposed to be better than anywhere in the world. So you have to decide that you're not going to be one of those who looks at something and tries to convince yourself that it's okay when you already know it isn't. So with that being said, from a sports standpoint, I'm on the Player Safety Committee now, National Football League, all the rule changes that you've seen in the last 2.5 years. I'm one of the voices on that committee. I tend to offer very strong views. I'm old school, I'll say it like that. So I tend to be rather harsh, and I don't apologize for being that way, because I believe that's important. But I also would say this from a competitive standpoint. I truly want to feel that you can be better. If there's anything I could do to help any of you become better, I will do it, because I want it to be a win-win situation. If I'm playing against you, I don't want to hurt you, because I want to only play against the best. The only way I can be the best is to play against the best. So I don't want you on the sideline. I want the best players playing so I can feel good about me and know where my level is. If you have a friend of yours who's a student and they have all A's and you have something negative about them, something's wrong with you. You should want to embrace the relationship. Try to understand, what can I do that can make me better, to raise the standard? So with that being said, a lot of the rules that you see with a concussion, with certain players trying to hit another player's knee that might cause severe damage, in all the years that I played, I would never tackle a running back at the level of the knee, because I don't know at what point in time the plant occurs, the blow occurs, the foot can't pivot, and you have a tear of a ligament. So I made sure that I was going to respect them, hoping they would respect me. And I played the game as clean as and hard as I believe anyone has ever played it, because mine is not a less than aggressive tenor, because it's not. But it was played with an understanding and respect for myself and respect for others. And I try to manage, if it is business, relationships, in somewhat that same way, because for me it's not all about you. It's who at different times you can help to grow and to improve. When we were in high school, we had a number of us who were students. Let's say if all of you are close on this front row, each one of you happens to do a little bit better in something than someone else. So what we would do is to have study groups at different people's homes. If it's English, if it's math, if it's geometry, if it's science. And that person who was good at what he did would try to assist away from school those others who weren't quite as good. And we would come together and do that because each one was trying to help the other one to better themselves, so that in future times, wherever they might be, whatever they're trying to achieve, you could enjoy the joy of having known them, of having been a part of what they've done. You can read about many people in the newspapers, back to papers again, who are trying to and doing many things. Sometimes you see money tied to it, which is fine, but you can look at what is happening in Silicon Valley. You can look at the Facebooks, the Twitters, the LinkedIns, the Googles, and you can think about it from a monetary standpoint. Because of having relationships and because of being in business, Ronnie Lott, who's on the Pro Football Hall of Fame, was involved with a company about 12 years ago that was related to people who were venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. And because of that, I had invested with Ronnie and some others in that venture. I invested in the second year of it versus the first year. And this is a point of reference because we had a relationship. I know him because of his ethics and character of played sport. I'm comfortable with that relationship. He had been able to open a door into Silicon Valley, somewhere where I happen not to be. His group ended up having in their first fund a certain number of shares of Google in Google's infancy. I was told 2 days ago, or maybe some of you could give me a reference, what did Google close at this week? What's the price of Google stock? Do any of you know that? Okay, one gentleman said $1,200. It might have been yesterday. Okay, that's correct. It's over $1,200 a share. In 1999, it was 50 cents a share. Now, the challenge was that most people wouldn't have had a way to reach for it because it was privately held at that time. But his group had created a way to do that. So the thing that happens is that there's a breadth of many things that continue to go on. There's a breadth of many places that you happen to be able to be. I'd come to this place in 1972 for the first time. Lamar Hunt was the first person from the Chiefs to be inducted. There was a gentleman named Joe Brown who works for the NFL. I did a commercial for the Hall of Fame in 1972, and it spoke about Route 77 and a relationship about that with the Hall, and we all embrace that at certain times. So I've enjoyed being able to offer you some of the background that Willie Lanier has had in his life, some of the things that I felt happen to be very important. I'm trying to wrap it so we can have a period for some questions from you. But before we do that, I have to take 60 more seconds to make a point. One of the last companies that I had been involved with owning was an automotive logistics company based out of Detroit. And we had about 1,000 employees building cars and trucks for Ford and Chrysler. Distribution to build 1,000 vehicles a day. Belvidere, Illinois was building 1,400 a day. And if I were trying to hire any of you to work at our facility, I would ask you, how do you define one? Is one a big number, small number? And it's not for you to answer. But the point would be that one error could cost me $10,000 a minute in liability. $10,000 a minute liability. If I had 10, let's say 15 errors in any period, we lose the contract. So there are reference points in many places and time to things that you do that have essence above what you might believe. And it's nothing wrong with having a very high threshold of requirement and responsibility for yourself and others around you. Thank you very much. I'll let the question and answer period unfold.
All right, I warned you. He's full of experiences, life experiences, business experience, pro football experiences. And I think what I get most from what Mr. Lanier has shared with you today is that in all of life, it is the same pattern that repeats. You have to continue to look at life and look at the challenges, look at the opportunities, and work towards them. We've had some questions that were sent to us by some of the schools that I'll start, Willie, with a couple that we got here, and then we're going to open it up to the schools to ask some. But one of the things before I even go to a question, and I underplayed it a little bit. Whoops, you're losing your microphone there. I underplayed it a little bit when I introduced Willie, and I think it's very important because there's something that I think goes to the core of a lot of what Willie has experienced in life. And when he came into pro football, having grown up in the South, having gone to segregated schools, having learned that there was a difference, whether it was wrong, it was an incorrect difference. He came into pro football into a situation where it was whites and blacks beginning to join together for a common purpose. But even there, he was singled out. He was the first black middle linebacker in pro football. Now, why is that important? The middle linebacker is the quarterback on defense. And there was this stereotypical image that African Americans couldn't be in places on a football team of decision making. Now, if you've just heard from this man, now, can you imagine, that this man is not capable of decision making? Now, he was trust into this position because he earned it as a middle linebacker at Morgan State. However, there's challenges that go with it. And I know you alluded a little bit to, not getting any penalties and so on, but the pressures, if you could just share, I think there's something to be known about facing that pressure of having to, one, be just that notch better to prove yourself again, and no one else having to have to do that. So if you wouldn't mind, Will.
Yeah, I think in terms of the point that Joe was referencing, my undergirding comes from faith, an undergirding of faith that benefited not only my family, but blacks who were enslaved and came to this country to face all of the challenges of an existence that was not in your favor. And the historical reality was that there was faith that was an undercurrent that allowed for a continuing view of how to make things better. So with that, the reality is that if I'm around any situation, even though it might appear negative, then you let your mind shift to how can you possibly change it? How can you inspire whoever might not quite be where you feel they need to be better? And it doesn't mean that it will happen, but what it will do for you is to allow you to continue on a path of trying to maintain a positive influence, trying to maintain not allowing yourself to be caught in a way that would detract from your ability and your performance. Try to not expect everything to always be positive and equal in your view. But it becomes one that you have to be studious about it, that you have to be reflective. And again, I think, going back to where I started this, about the question in terms of reading and being aware, because what you will see is that many people throughout our society and the world, you can start with the president where you see a lot of things that go on there on down. It's not as if though every day someone is going to be in agreement. There'll be many times some disagreement that sometimes can be very vehement. There can be many things that you read about that you try to understand, and I think all that helps you to be able to figure out how to master your own journey.
Apologize for having to keep using the same mic, so maybe I'll put it here and we can both hit it.
Yeah,
How's that?
That's fine.
All right.
We'll work that out.
We have, from Quest Recoveries, we had this question put to you, Willie, and specifically. And it's kind of a broad question, but I think it goes to something that has been an undercurrent through your entire presentation. But what was your biggest motivation to play in the NFL? Not just to play football, but why did you want to go on from college? What did the NFL mean to you?
See, this is interesting how I answer this question. I didn't have a great motivation to play in the NFL. The motivation to play football came from my brother. I had a brother that was 2 years older than I am, and he had certain gifts that God had given him athletically. He only weighed 185 pounds, but he could clean and press 350 when he was in high school. He could, in the military, he could box. He had wonderful musical skills. He was very gifted athletically. So as a brother, a younger brother, I was trying to be as good as he was. So with that,
Here's his back end.
okay. So with that being the case, as I tried to be better than he was, I started to see that I had certain understanding of the game. And my understanding of the game was not just from a physical standpoint. It was as if though, if that was the Rubik's Cube, I would bet I could beat you in it. Now, I'm not good at a Rubik's Cube, but I'm making a point. If my mind is quicker than yours, I can beat you. So I saw the game in that kind of way. So it happened to have a physical component, but it was one that was, I can do this. But it wasn't based on some physical model, because any of us can beat anyone else if we understand leverage. I mean, so it's a very interesting reality, but each person, on my own view, was one of the motivation was to see how well you could do it, how you could better the way it was being done, and then allow that to be your own signature.
Okay. All right, let's go to one of the other schools. Why don't let me pick one of your schools here today. Canton South. Where are you at, Canton South? Do we have a question for Willie? Canton South, anybody want to be bold? If we got microphones out here, we'll hand out so you can be heard. All right, well, all right, right there. Oh, okay, shy. All right, we're gonna go back to another question we had submitted already, and this was something that, I've got to find here. What was the most difficult setback you had? Now, I think we're specifically talking your pro football career, and how did you overcome it? But if you want to transition that from a setback in pro football and how you overcame it to a setback in life and how you overcame it, that's fine.
Well, I think the place in football was that, how many of you have had a concussion in this room? Okay. How many of you have been unconscious for 15 minutes? Jesus. Okay. How many of you have been unconscious for half an hour? How many an hour? How many 2 hours? Okay. This was very interesting, okay? My first year in Kansas City, I'm trying to be this dominant middle linebacker. I'm very athletic, and we're playing in San Diego, so there's a lead play. Offensive lineman fires out low. The running back has the ball handed to him, split backfield. Instead of trying to hit the offensive guard, knock him away, make the play, I decided to do something that none of you should ever do. I left my feet. I just dove over him. I'm skilled. Tried to make the play. I caught a knee in the top of the forehead. I was not, that was interesting. I was not, I was not knocked out, but I had a slight concussion. I didn't ever have any headaches, any pain, anything. I left the field, and the field looked like it did that a little bit. By the time I showered and changed, everything was fine. So we go back to Kansas City. I practice all week. The next week, I'm getting ready to call the defense, and I collapse. And I'm out for 2 hours. That's why I asked that question. Because most people don't know anybody who's been out for 2 hours because you don't make it. So what occurred was that I had to then try to look at this game of football. I was back to play with a whole lot of things that I don't need to get into, but I was subsequently sent to Mayo Clinic for all the neurological exams, and I was told I had had a previously undiagnosed subdural hematoma. Now, you know, all of you know what that means, that you might die, very simply. So then I decided that if I play again, how must I do that? I asked the physician at Mayo Clinic, can I have an unequivocal clean bill of health? He said no, but I had survived. So I decided that if I played again, I had to figure out how to play the game 90% safe for me. And I did that by looking at the game based on physics, because the game is one of physics, angles, geometry, math, principles, and leverage. So you had to pay attention to the impacts with your head, because a very low blow tore a blood vessel. But I played another 10 years and only missed 1/4 of a game. I don't have anything wrong today. And it came from understanding and making decisions based on a circumstance that's current. And many of you who've had concussions, you have to try to continually take your head out of play if you're playing football, because what you don't know is how low a blow can cause a tear.
Thank you. I'm going to try again here with Glen Oak High School. Glen Oak, I heard a large cheer when you acknowledge yourself. Now, how about a question? We have something that you heard this morning that you want to follow up with the question. Here we go, Willie over on the left.
Yeah, you played with you played for the late Hank Stram. I was wondering what he taught you, not only as a man, but also as a football player.
Well, I think I will speak about from the taught as a man standpoint. Hank was very committed to perfection. Hank was very much one of being innovative. Hank was very much involved in our defensive strategy and the way we played what was called a stack defense. So it was more on that side of the ledger. The other areas in terms of involvement with how I define me, I basically drew a line. I define me. I can work with you and for you, but I don't allow any additional room other than that. So it was a great relationship, a very positive one. There were outcomes that obviously has been shown by many of the things that were achieved. And he was really ahead of his time, I feel, and because of television, maybe not being as broad with cable and networks and reviews, he sometimes, I believe, doesn't quite get his accolades relative to some other coaches who've coached after he was there.
Well, this is a question that we have from Quest Recovery, and it's interesting. and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit because I'm going to steer you a little. It says, if you compare the racism that you received in the NFL, that's an assumption, to when you were in college, was it worse or more consistent? Now, again, you went to an all-black university. So if you could just, I mean, it's not so much the racism comparison that I think is interesting, but was there a different set of rules in both the integrated world that you moved into from the one that you lived in prior to? What were the
I don't really think there was any different set of rules between the integrated world and the segregated world from one to the other. The place that, and it really wasn't the NFL, the society where you could see a difference, because you grow up in one place and that's all you see, and then you're in another broader area, you see something different. So in 1967, the Kansas City Chiefs played 2 preseason games, one in Birmingham, Alabama, the other in Jackson, Mississippi. For those of you who followed anything about the civil rights movement, Birmingham and Jackson probably were the 2 most egregious, uncomfortable places to be. So we ended up playing a game in both of those cities that summer. And in Jackson, or in both Birmingham and Jackson, the fans in the stadium the blacks had to sit in one section, upper right part of that stadium. I observed what I would call hatred and the way people looked at one another. No one did anything. I mean, I'm just watching people on the street. We were on there for 36 hours. And it just seemed harsh in the way people observed blacks. So what I decided when I came back to Kansas City was that with 50 states in the Union and Alabama and Mississippi being 2, I don't really need to go back to either of those. So I've been back to Alabama, a lot of business being done, and I'm fine with that. But as it turned out, the only time I've been into Mississippi was in 1967, August. I have not been back. And it's not that I expect anything to be wrong there. It just was interesting over a point of time, observing something and then reflecting upon it. So I think with answering it in that way, the things that are spoken about, if in Black History Month, for those who've lived it, to talk about it directly one-on-one to you, can give really a quality to the essence of what they really felt it was like versus you seeing it on television somewhere else or just reading about it.
One of the things that I think I've heard over the years and hear from our Hall of Famers and former players is that while we use it very often, we use the term sports as a microcosm of society that, that it emulates one or the other. I think that in sport, and correct me if you disagree, Will, but I think in sport that there was, particularly during the 60s and into the 70s, there were more steps being taken and more of a sense of team and unity between black and white than maybe in the broader community. Did you feel that sense of community on the field that existed, then off the field was less?
The thing that happened in Kansas City, coming to a team that was integrated with individuals that grew up in the South, white and black, with individuals that had political views that were extreme to the right, extreme to the left, with individuals that have any view that you might want to even think of. There was one core objective, and that was to win and to win the championship or the Super Bowl. So what would happen is that regardless of what feelings any of you might have had about any particular thing, you knew this morning that you were coming to Canton, Ohio for this program, for this person to stand here to speak to you, and hopefully you left whatever other views that could be too challenging outside the door. Well, the same thing occurred with the teams. That's the way it happened. And in 1970, if there were a 45-man roster in the NFL, the Chiefs had 22 or 23 who were African American at that time. And that was far higher than any other team in the league.
It was interesting. If you wouldn't mind sharing with the class, the students, it's even to the degree that Willie was recruited from Morgan State to become a pro football player, it was done differently because he was an African American. If you can relate that story we talked about last night.
Well, from the economic...
From Warren Wilson, yeah.
Okay, yes. So what happens is that, unfortunately, the line of segregation created a view that if someone were black and really wanted to play, you could get them for less than it would take to get someone from a white school. So as it turned out for me, I was the 48th player drafted in the country. Jim Lynch from Notre Dame I was the 50th player drafted in the country. Jim Lynch was the 48th. At that time, we did not know one another, but we were chosen for the same position. My college coach and the first black executive in the NFL, who was named Buddy Young, was trying to make sure we had all the proper information. So Jim Lynch signed very soon after the draft, and Buddy Young looked at his contract and told my college coach and therefore told me. So we knew what the numbers were. I won't give you the numbers, but the first person from the Kansas City Chiefs that came to see me was a scout, and he started talking money and referenced money much, much less than what was being offered to Jim Lynch, the other player who was the 48th drafted player in the country. So I explained to him after he made some comments to me that were very negative and it would be shocking to any of you, that one, because I'm a student at the school, you can't speak to me this way. Three things will happen. I will not go to county to play football, which he had suggested. He needed to go back to Kansas City and tell them they sent the wrong whatever to see me. And I would sue them for trying to take away my right to earn a living by threatening me. I called the coach of the Kansas City Chiefs the next day and said, let me explain something to you. I'm a graduating student at Morgan State College. The only responsibility I have is to graduate. The draft that you had does not affect me because I have not signed a contract with you. If you think that you will disrespect me and I will come to work for you, you're sadly mistaken, because that's not who I am. I hung the phone up. So that was where I started my career. You can never give up your integrity to anybody. Never. So it becomes central to, I'm glad you asked that. I didn't give you the backstory, but whatever. But that was the essence of a reality that as you live life, you're faced with different moments. And you don't have a parent to turn to, you don't have a friend to turn to. You have to look at the fact that you are free in America. And that truly means that.
We have another question. I won't single out a school. Right here, young man's hand went right up.
It'll come to you.
It'll come.
Good, just work with it.
Okay. Do we have someone else while he's rethinking his question? Right up here in the front row. In the front row, right here. Raise your hand again.
Due to the fact that you played in the NFL, besides taking a knee to the head, what do you think your worst experience would be?
I'm going to repeat the question so everybody else heard it. You said, having played in the NFL and having taken that knee to the head and had that serious injury, what was the next best or the next greatest challenge? Is that?
No, what was his worst experience?
What was his worst experience?
Well, I think the worst experience at times tend to deal with, it deals twofold. It deals with race and ethics, okay? Because at different times there were racial issues from where you lived, where people would think it'd be okay to deny you the ability to live there. Oh, I'll give you one, which was very interesting, because where I lived in Kansas City, there were very few blacks living there. I had children, 2 sons. My daughter wasn't born at that time, and they were attending majority white schools, probably very few, nowhere near as diverse as this group. So I had told my sons that if any of the other students at the school called them the N-word, to punch them in the nose. Because that's what I told them to do. Their mother said, you shouldn't do that. I said, yes, I should do that. Because if the school allowed that to be said, I'll go to school and challenge them of an environment that was not positive for my child. Well, that never happened at the school. But I was coming home one day from practice, and I turned the corner, and I see a young man leaving this house, walking up the street with his head in his hand. And I presumed that, he must have called him the N-word. This happened. So I get home, I don't say anything to him, and there's a knock on the door. And there's a gentleman at the door who happens to be that young man's father. And I said, before you say anything, let me explain something to you. I instructed my sons that if they were called that word, to strike that person in the nose. And the only place that a child could believe that word was acceptable was in the home. So if you have something to say, go ahead and say it. He walked away. So I offer that because that's a very real moment, and it's a moment that I chose to manage it that way. And more of the points of discomfort have come from moving into a neighborhood and home I'm still in 37 years ago, a country club where everybody else who was there could enjoy the benefits. And the only communication I've had from that country club since 1977 was that your application for membership has been denied. I have not had one other peep. And only 2 years ago, one of the attorneys who represented that club called me and said he wanted to meet with me. I thought, this is going to be very interesting. I go by and think that he has to cover that moment, and he says he wants to apologize because he did something he knew was wrong then, didn't have the courage to not take the case. I accepted his apology, but it has resonated around these different moments of life and things that occur.
Great. Over here, the gentleman in the yellow sweater. Wait for the microphone so we can hear your question. Here it comes.
How did you react when you got called the N-word on the field? Or
it's really interesting. I played a very aggressive game, okay? So it would have surprised me if really someone called me that on the field, so that never happened. But what did happen was this, and I'll have to give you letters because I obviously will not use this polysyllable that starts with an M and the other word, you know what goes with it. So we're playing the St. Louis Rams, St. Louis Cardinals in St. Louis, and it's a preseason game. And the play is made, someone is tackled, I'm coming over, I'm starting to head down toward the tackle is made, I do what I think is very acceptable. I rotate over the person, a quick 360, and I hear a voice. And that voice hollers out, "You dirty, black," whatever those other two words were. So I presume, so you should never presume, I presume that's someone white who has now called me something that I completely unacceptable, and I turned expecting it to be, but it's a black guy, wide receiver, St. Louis Cardinals. So now here I am in this moment of expecting, I wasn't going to hit him or anything, but I just responded. So I take a deep breath, and now I'm truly frustrated because this was someone that was not who I expected to be. I couldn't express my anger. And what happened with that, because I'm going to play within the rules, if I was a middle linebacker and he was a wide receiver, I'd go 25, 30 yards deep, hoping he caught the end pattern so I could have a chance to express myself. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. He was traded from St. Louis to Minnesota. I looked at our schedule. Do we play them this year? Because I still have him in my sights. We didn't play him that year. So then he's traded to Atlanta. This is true. He played to the Atlanta Falcons maybe 4 years later. And his name was John Gilliam. So they're playing in Kansas City preseason game. I'm sitting in the lobby. They come through. And I said, "John, come here. Let me tell you something that has happened that you have no idea. This is what you said. This is how I felt about it. And until today, I was really going to harm you if I had a chance. But since the length of time has gone by, I just wanted to share it with you." So it's always very interesting how we can presume something and not be right, how you still have to manage yourself in a civil manner because it's required. And that's all part of this that all of you have to understand also.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question right here. What was your mindset going into a game, Will?
After my first year, my mindset was to finish the game healthy. That was the only mindset, to finish the game healthy. And when my son played, both of them played, the only thing I've asked him after the game is, "How's your health?" Because of what happened that first year. And I recognized that it really couldn't be one of being trapped in the emotion of a game. It happened to be trapped in the emotion of life and the reality that the game could harm. So you play it, but only in the context of how it affects all of you.
Okay, and with that, I want to ask you to give your guest speaker, Willie Lanier, a loud round of applause. Once again, we thank all of you for being here today and hope you enjoy the rest of the day as you visit the Hall of Fame. Thank you very much.